The start of a new semester always brought a mix of anticipation and dread. For me, it was no different. As I stood outside the towering faculty building on the first day of classes, the sight of students bustling around with notebooks and coffee cups felt oddly surreal. It was my second year, and I had finally begun to feel comfortable navigating the chaos of university life. The campus had its fair share of urban legends. Some were about eccentric professors who had once been jailed for political activism. Others were about students who disappeared mysteriously, though those were likely concocted by overactive imaginations. Yet, the stories about Professor Adewale had always struck a different chord. He's a genius, people will say, but don't cross him or you'll regret it. I had heard about him and his reputation, and to approach his classes with caution. Adewale was one of the most renowned professors in the Department of Sociology, celebrated for his groundbreaking research and fiery lectures. But there was another side to him, one that made students speak in hushed tones. He has favorites, a senior once told me, and if you are not one of them, good luck passing his course. Favorites was an euphemism. The insinuation lingered in the air, unspoken but understood. When I finally stepped into the lecture hall that morning, I was determined to stay unnoticed. I chose a seat near the back, hoping to blend in among the sea of eager faces. Professor Adewale entered the room with an air of authority, tall, broad shouldered, and impeccably dressed. He carried himself like a man who knew he commanded respect. His voice boomed as he introduced the course syllabus, his passion for the subject evident in every word. At first, I was impressed. He spoke with conviction, weaving complex sociological theories into engaging stories. By the end of the lecture, the entire room was captivated. Maybe the rumors were exaggerated, I thought, as I packed up my notebook. But over the next few weeks, I began to notice things. The way his gaze lingered on certain students, always female, always young. The subtle, almost imperceptible smirk he wore when addressing them. At first, I dismissed it as paranoia. After all, wasn't he just being friendly? It wasn't until the midterm results were posted that I understood the truth. Midterms had always been a source of anxiety, but I had poured my heart into preparing for Professor Adewale's exam. His lectures were dense with information, and I had spent countless nights reviewing every slide, rereading notes, and discussing key concepts with my classmates. When the results were finally posted, I rushed to the notice board, squeezing through a crowd of people to find my name. My finger slid down the list, scanning for my score. There it was, 40%. I stared at the number, my heart struggling to process it. How could this be? I had answered every question to the best of my ability. That's harsh, Amaka, my best friend, said when she saw my face. She leaned over my shoulder to look at the results. You didn't fail though, just barely. Barely might as well be failing, I muttered. Amaka shrugged. Maybe he just a tough grader. You should talk to him. Ask for feedback. Who knows? He might let you rework some of your answers. The thought of approaching him made my stomach churn, but I knew she was right. If I didn't address it, now I risked failing the entire course. That afternoon, I waited outside his office, clutching my exam script. The corridor was eerily quiet, the muffled sound of people chatting echoing faintly in the distance. When it was finally my turn, I hesitated before knocking. Come in, his deep voice rumbled from inside. I stepped into the office, immediately hit by the smell of old books and polished wood. His desk was cluttered with papers, but everything else was meticulously organized. A roll of certificates on the wall, shelves lined up with academic journals, and a single leather chair positioned opposite his. Ah, Miss Adebayo, he said, leaning back in his chair. To what do I owe this visit? I wanted to ask about my midterm grade, I stammered, holding out my script. I don't understand how I scored so low. He took the paper from me, glancing at it briefly before setting it down. Your answers lacked depth, he said dismissively. Sociology isn't just about regurgitating information, it's about critical thinking. I understand, sir, but I thought I had addressed the key points. He cut me off with a wave of his hand. Effort is admirable, Miss Adebayo, but effort alone doesn't guarantee results. However, he paused, his gaze settling on me with unsettling intensity. There are ways to ensure your success in this course. What do you mean? I asked, my throat dry. He smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that sent chills down my spine. Let's just say I'm willing to help students who are willing to help themselves. The weight of his word hit me like a slap. I froze, unsure how to respond. Think about it, he said, leaning forward. You're a bright girl. I'd hate to see you struggle unnecessarily. For days, I replayed the conversation in my mind, hoping I had misunderstood him. But deep down, I knew what he meant. The realization made me sick to my stomach. Amaka noticed the change in me almost immediately. You've been acting weird lately, she said one evening as we sat in the dormitory. Is everything okay? I wanted to tell her I needed to tell someone, but the words wouldn't come. It's nothing, I lied. Just stressed about the exams. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't push either. As the weeks went on, Adewale's behavior became more blatant. He would single me out during lectures, questioning my answers in a tone that felt more mocking than intrusive. When I avoided his gaze, he would smirk as if he enjoyed watching me squirm. One afternoon, I found an envelope slipped under my dorm room door. Inside was a handwritten note. Miss Adebayo, you are failing behind. My office, 6 p.m. Don't keep me waiting. My heart sank. When I arrived at his office, he greeted me with the same predatory smile. I'm glad you came, he said, gesturing for me to sit. I stayed by the door. What do you want from me? He chuckled, unbothered by my hostility. I thought I made myself clear. Your grade isn't where it should be, but I can fix that if you're willing to cooperate. I'm not interested, I said firmly, turning to leave. Think carefully, Miss Adebayo. He called after me. Failure isn't a good look on anyone. By the time I got back to my dorm, I was trembling. I knew I couldn't handle this alone. That night, I told Amaka everything. Her reaction was immediate and fierce. That bastard, she exclaimed, pacing the room. He's been doing this for years, hasn't he? We have to report him. To who? I asked, my voice breaking. The university. They will side with him. He's untouchable. Amaka stopped pacing, her expression softening. Not if we have proof, she said. We need to catch him in the act. The plan she proposed made my stomach churn, but I knew she was right. The only way to expose him was to gather undeniable evidence. Amaka lent me a small voice recorder, and together we rehearsed what I would say. You don't have to do this alone, she said as I prepared to leave. I'll be right outside the office. Her words gave me the courage I needed. The following day, I walked into Professor Adewale's office with trembling hands but a determined heart. Amaka's voice echoed in my mind. Stick to the plan. Get him talking. Don't let him intimidate you. Miss Adebayo, he greeted, his smile, predatory as always. I knew you would come to your senses. I forced a timid smile, masking the disgust roiling inside me. I've been thinking about what you said, I murmured, glancing around the room as if nervous, about how I can improve my grade. He leaned back in his chair, clearly pleased with himself. I told you, I reward initiative. You're a bright girl. I can help you if you're willing to help me. I swallowed hard, willing my voice not to betray my fear. How does this work? His eyes glinted, his tone smooth and calculated. It's simple. You spend a little time with me outside the confines of those walls, and I ensure you not only pass this course, but graduate with flying colors. I felt bile rise in my throat, but I pressed on, and no one would find out. He chuckled, the sound sending chills down my spine. Discretion is my specialty. I've done this before, and let's just say everyone benefited. There it was, the admission I needed. My heart pounded as the recorder hidden in my bag captured every word. I would think about it, I said, forcing myself to hold his gaze. When would you want to meet? Tonight, he said, without hesitation. My place, I will text you the address. I nodded, feigning agreement, and quickly excused myself. As soon as I was out of his office, I ran straight to Amaka, barely able to catch my breath. I got it, I whispered, handing her the recorder. She played it back, and we listened to his voice, calm and confident, incriminating himself without a second thought. This is it, Amaka said, her eyes blazing with determination. We are going to take him down. The evidence we had was a good start, but Amaka insisted we needed more to ensure the university couldn't dismiss our claims. Over the next few days, we discreetly reached out to other girls who had hinted at similar experiences with Professor Diwali. It wasn't easy. Many of them were too scared to talk, afraid of the repercussions. But when we played the recording, their fear began to give way to anger. He did the same thing to me last year, one girl said, her voice trembling with rage. I didn't have proof, so I just stayed quiet. Another girl added, he failed me because I refused. I had to retake the course with another professor. By the end of the week, we had gathered testimonies from 5 girls, each with her own story of harassment and coercion. Some had emails, others had text messages, small piece of information that painted a damning picture of his abuse of power. With everything compiled, we decided it was time to take our case to the university administration. The Dean of Students' office was an intimidating space, with towering bookshelves and the stern presence of Dean Musa, who sat behind his mahogany desk. Amaka and I sat nervously across from him, clutching the folder of evidence. What brings you here today? He asked, his tone neutral but piercing. I took a deep breath. We are here to report misconduct by Professor Adewale. He's been sexually harassing female students, using his position to coerce them into inappropriate relationship for grades. The dean's expression tightened. These are serious allegations. Do you have proof? Amaka handed over the record and our compilation of testimonies. We do. This recording and these statements from other students should make things clear. The dean pressed play, and Adewale's voice filled the room, calm and confident as he incriminated himself. As the recording ended, the room was heavy with silence. Dean Musa let out a slow breath, his expression grave. This is disturbing, he said. I would escalate this to disciplinary committee immediately. In the meantime, Adewale will be suspended pending further investigation. Amaka leaned forward, her voice firm. That's not enough. He's dangerous, and students need to know they are protected. If this gets swept under the rug, you will have blood on your hands. The dean gave her a sharp look, but nodded. We will take immediate action. Thank you for coming forward. News of Adewale's suspension spread quickly. His absence from the lectures was met with mixed reaction. Some students were baffled, while others exchanged knowing glances. The university formed a disciplinary panel to investigate the allegations. Amaka and I, along with other survivors, were called in to testify. Sitting behind the panel, I recounted my experience in painstaking details. It was one of the hardest things I had ever done, but I knew it was necessary. As the testimony piled up, Adewale's defense crumbled. Emails, text messages, and other evidence painted a damning picture of a man who had abused his power for years. The hearing lasted weeks, with media outlets picking up the story and turning it into a national scandal. Finally, the panel announced its decision. Professor Dewali was to be terminated immediately and reported to the authorities for prosecution. The day the verdict was delivered, the campus was electric with a sense of justice. Adewale, once untouchable, had been exposed for what he truly was, a predator hiding behind a facade of respectability. For many survivors, the investigation's outcome was a bittersweet victory. While justice had been served, the scars left by Adewale's action would take time to heal. Amaka and I decided to channel our energy into creating something meaningful. Together, we organized a campus wide event called Breaking the Silence, a forum where students could share their stories and learn about their rights. The turnout was overwhelming. Dozens of students, both men and women, came forward to talk about their experience with harassment and discrimination. One girl, barely holding back tears, said, I didn't think anyone would believe me, but seeing all of you here gives me hope. That night, I realized the power of our voices. By speaking out, we weren't just helping ourselves, we were empowering others to do the same. In the weeks following Adewale's arrest, the campus atmosphere was charged with mixed emotions. Some students rallied behind the survivors, offering unwavering support and demanding systematic change. Others whispered in hallways, uncomfortable with the spotlight on such a sensitive issue. Student organizations, particularly the Women's Advocacy Network, began organizing protests and forums. Their slogan, No More Silence, was emblazoned on posters, banners, and t shirts across campus. The university administration, under mounting pressure from students, faculty, and the media, announced a series of reforms. Among them was the creation of a sexual harassment prevention and response unit, staffed with trained counselors and legal advisors. The Dean of Students personally reached out to Amaka and myself, inviting us to serve on the advisory committee for the new unit. Though I was initially hesitant, still haunted by my experience, I realized it was an opportunity to ensure no one else would endure what we had. During our first meeting, I sat across from professors, administrators, and legal experts, many of whom looked visibly uncomfortable. I didn't care. I spoke candidly about the systematic issues that had allowed Adewale's behavior to persist for so long. We need more than policies on paper, I said. We need accountability, transparency, and a culture that prioritizes students' safety over protecting reputations. To my surprise, my words were met with nod of agreement. The committee drafted a comprehensive policy, including mandatory training for faculty and staff, anonymous reporting channels, and stricter consequence for misconduct. When the policy was finally implemented, it felt like a victory, not just for me, but for everyone who had suffered in silence. Beyond the university, the case sparked a broader conversation about power dynamics in academia. News outlets covered the story extensively, framing it as a watershed moment in the fight against sexual harassment in Nigerian universities. Thank you for watching and thank you for listening to our wonderful story. Until we come your way again, kindly like, subscribe, and share this channel. Tales Before Dark.